Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, in this Ramadan reflection project, my topic is like economic maxims in Quran and higher purpose, Maqasid. So, in this reflection exercise, what I did was reflected on the verses of Quran and throughout the chapters of Quran, I found one similar kind of pattern that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, whenever He is talking about uh, transactions or commerce or even anything related to the or dealings related to the economic aspect of life of anyone, including Muslims and non-Muslims, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is directing us towards the higher purpose. So, my reflection is going to focus on that side of study. And this is related to the Maqasid methodology as well, and related to the reimagining economics uh, through different uh, perspective, like how Quran uh, always connects things, either they are from economics or not from economics, how Quran connects things to higher purpose. There is some purpose behind there. There is some goal, objective, concepts, groups. So we come to know that when we read different chapters of Quran, starting from the Surah Fatiha, then Surah Al-Baqarah, and then we, go on and on and on, and we find a lot of verses in Quran which are addressing the economic aspects of life, and we find that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is beautifully combining the materialistic and not materialistic things together. So I found that in economics from Islamic perspective is not isolated. It's not like in conventional economics we see that when they are talking about economics or economic phenomena, they are majorly they are discussing the economics, in an isolated space. But in Quran we find that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is, whenever He is discussing some theory or phenomena, or and he's directing something and related to the economic lives, he is connecting that materialistic thing or materialistic action to some another higher purpose, which is related to the non-materialistic things as well, or non-materialistic actions or consequences. Okay, so which shows us that even our materialistic actions have non-materialistic consequences. For example, our economic activities, if done in a wrong manner, uh, brings destruction to people in their lives and bring exploitation to people in their lives, not only to the exploitation of resources, but exploitation of intellect as well, or exploitation of morals, and how deteriorated the concept of justice and morals have become in our society, because of the fact that we in conventional economics we have been seeing the and studying the economics in an isolated manner, and we are not seeing that like in Quran Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is connecting the ihsan. For example, in many verses we see that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, whenever he's talking about the poverty or richness and or other economic transactions or dealings, he's talking about ihsan, justice, moral. So my presentation will be based on that thing, that how all these are higher purposes, so about which people do not usually think, especially people who are into the conventional economics. Yeah, in recently people have come towards that thing. They have started talking about sustainability and ethics. But still, if we see and read Quran and reflect on the verses of the Quran, we come to know that we have the excellent higher purposes mentioned in Quran, and we have to reflect over and over again and again to find those purposes. Then we see that basic uh, basic so obviously Quran is a comprehensive book. It is a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the all the maxims in Quran related to the higher purposes cannot be mentioned in one presentation. Hence, that's why I have mentioned the basic commercial maxims in Quran and higher purpose. So we see when we reflect over the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 268, that Shaitan threatens you with poverty. So the interesting thing in this presentation is that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, it is a pattern in the Quran that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, whenever Allah is addressing the people who have money, and then Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is addressing the people who don't have money, and then people who have money, where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is directing them to give zakat, give sadaqah, and don't hoard things, and do not be extravagant. Then Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is addressing other part of the world who might not be having money or who are poor, into poverty. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is addressing them that giving them hint that Shaitan might divert you towards doing wrong things, or he might incite you to do immorality because of your poverty. So what we come to know that uh, richness and poverty both might have wrong consequences if they are not managed as per the higher purposes, as per the purposes mentioned in the Quran. So, so this is the reflection which I made. We see that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala joins the economic aspect with the moral consequences, both in richness and poverty. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is mentioning that Satan threatens you with poverty and orders you to immorality, while Allah promises you forgiveness from him and bounty. So here Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is showing us that a beautiful concept that even in poverty, some people might be incited by shaitan and they might act on their desires. For example, they may commit some immorality such as theft. They might indulge in theft because they are poor. They don't have money. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing people with poverty, then they have to show his son the good conduct, the best conduct, and have to work hard, or that is another topic. But here, what I'm trying to show is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is connecting poverty, which is related to the economic aspect of a life, to the non-materialistic thing, immorality, which shows us that our lives and even the life of everyone, but specifically the life of us Muslims, should not be our economic lives should not be free of non-materialistic things. We have to focus on the higher purposes mentioned in Quran in our economic lives, because our purpose is not like to just our economic goals are not restricted to this world, but our economic goals strengthen till the end, akhira. So, and then we see into verse number 269. He, the beautiful thing is that we will discuss that in the next slide, that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in between these two verses. In verse 270, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that whatever you spend of your expenditures or make woes, indeed Allah knows of it. Then Allah subhanahu in verse number 268, he is talking about poverty and how shaitan might incite someone, or a person who is into poverty might be indulged in immorality if they do not fear Allah and they do not follow the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then in verse 270, see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about expenditure, that Allah is aware of that. whatever you are spending. Then in between, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in between these two verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully talking about wisdom, that he gives wisdom to whom he wills, and whoever has been given wisdom has certainly been given much good. So the beautiful thing is, the reflection which I got from these three verses is that wisdom is somehow connected to both of these things, richness, poverty, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here talking about wisdom. Wisdom is not a materialistic thing, but wisdom is a risk. So we come to know that wisdom and hikmah is a risk which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants to whom he wills, like money, that he grants to whom he wills. Not everyone has wisdom, and not everyone has hikmah. Then we see that somehow wisdom is connected to poverty as well, that someone who is into poverty, and if they use their wisdom, they will not fall into the incitements of the shaitan and commit immorality such as theft or involve in riba. So similarly, wisdom can be attached to the richness as well. The someone who has money, they will do their expenditures nicely as per the commandments of the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran. And so these three are higher purposes, that if we see these concepts of poverty, richness, in conventional economics, we will be seeing that okay, um, we will be talking about poverty, richness. But when we are talking about poverty and richness from the perspective of Quran, we come to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting these two things with non-materialistic things as well. Higher purposes. What are the higher purposes here? Higher purpose here is the wisdom and the understanding, the purpose of money, that why we have money and how we have to utilize that money, what is the purpose behind that. If we are into poverty, what is the purpose of that, and how we have to act in that poverty. So we then we this was the discussion which I did. This is the text related to that discussion, that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing both poverty and richness, and he is connecting the higher purposes to both of these things. Then I have made this little manual diagram of that verse of the Quran, that how Satan threatens you with poverty. So you go towards immorality and orders you, because he orders you towards immorality. The verse of Surah Baqarah 268. The devil threatens you with the prospect of poverty and brings you to the shameful deeds of stinginess. Okay. Uh, then we see another verse of Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 91. Okay, another interesting thing which I found, the similar higher purpose mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran, that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that interest, riba, leads to animosity. Gambling leads to animosity, hatred between you. Satan's plan is to stir up hostility and hatred between you with intoxicants and gambling, and to prevent you from remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and praying. Will you not then abstain? Here again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about gambling, which is related to the economic aspect of life. But he is connecting that to the higher purpose. That how it leads to animosity, and how it leads to harm, fights, imbalance, burden, greed in the society. All these things and many other things. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is here connecting the economic aspect to the higher purpose, which is coming under the umbrella of non-materialistic thing. And then we see and the example of those who abst and the example of those who spend in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, these verses are talking about the spending habits. And then in these verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is again blending and joining the morality, the concept of ihsan and economic transactions. So even in other parts of the Quran, we come to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting moral concept of morals, justice in the economic aspects of our lives. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, we're in verse number 267, Surah Al-Baqarah, "O you have believed, spend from the good things which you have earned, and from that which we have produced for you from the earth, and do not aim towards the refective therefrom, spending from that while you would not take it yourself except with closed eyes." Such a beautiful verse. The reflection behind this verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala though is talking about the materialistic thing, spending and giving things which you have, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting that thing, that materialistic thing, to the non-materialistic thing and the higher purpose, morals. And what is that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting that thing to that give only that thing which you would have taken yourself. So, for example, if you don't like something, the thing which you would not accept for yourself, you should not be, a defective thing. You should not be intending a defective thing for others. Or, for example, from economics perspective, you should not be involving in the contract with somebody, and then in your mind you think, okay, I will be getting this benefit, even if you know that from this from because of your certain move in that contract, you will be getting the benefit, but other person will be getting the loss, or that person will be in loss situation. Not the general profit and loss, but some kind of act or some kind of service or your plot might cause you benefit but loss to the other partner of yours. This cannot be accepted in the concepts of Islamic economics. Then another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in verse 263, Surah Baqarah, speaking that, beautifully, that kind speech and forgiveness are better than charity followed by injury. That again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting the economic aspect, commercial dealings, also the charity with the morals. That although you are spending, but if you are giving charity or spending on someone, uh, it is not good if you are reminding them again and again of your favors that you have given that, or you have given this thing to them, you have given thing to them, because it's like an injury. So this is the higher purpose, that although this is about money or some gift or some materialistic thing, but but Allah is connecting that if you are reminding that thing, reminding here is connected, is taken like an injury as per Quran. So this is a beautiful thing, because in conventional economics, they will not consider the reminding as injury. So even in philanthropy, they will not consider reminding of charity as an act of injury. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is considering as injury, and He's saying that it is better that you know say good things and forgive and a kind speech. So kind speech and forgiveness are better than charity followed by injury. So charity is obviously better, but if your charity is followed by injury, like reminding of your favors, then it is better you give charity in the form of kind speech. Or in another manner, if you understand this verse, is that a person is there is person A who is counseling the pupil, and he is using his words, uh, non-materialistic thing, to bring good to the pupil. And then another person is spending a lot of money, but he is then hurting the pupil by their reminders. So obviously this person A is better than person B. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting the higher purpose, with the materialistic phenomena. Then we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again in verse 280 and verse 282, you know, demonstrating that how maxims and moral principles, uh, yeah, how it is better in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give respite to the debtors. So if you have given some amount to somebody and they are in hardship and you give respite to them, you give time to them, it is better. And then he is also saying that it is more better that you forgive that money if you are in that position. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting the higher purpose with the economic phenomena, and we cannot find such kind of higher purposes, higher objectives, higher maqasid in we cannot see these things in conventional economics. Then we have another verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us another interesting thing is that when you contract a debt for a specified term, write it down. So why? So although it is a materialistic thing, it is an economic phenomena. But again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the higher purpose behind that, the maqasid behind that. Maqasid is behind this concept, behind writing down the contract and its terms and conditions is justice. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and let a scribe write it between you in justice, so that there is no problem in between you or the partners or the two parties or the two people in future. Okay, so we then have another slide. So this was the main reflection of this presentation, that how and this phenomena is not restricted to just Surah Nisa, Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Imran, Surah Al-Maida, which I have taken. Also, I have taken one verse from Surah Yunus. So, but even if it is, this pattern can be seen in the entire Quran. When you reflect over the verses of the Quran from economic perspective, you see that. You see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always connecting the higher purpose with economic phenomena or economic theory or commercial transactions, or when he is directing something related to charity or poverty or spending everything related to the economics or commerce. He's always talking about before that, after that, or in that same verse, he's joining the concepts of morality, justice, transparency, and also to refrain from animosity, hatred, gambling, and access risk. So this is such kind of thing that we cannot see this in conventional economics that much. And also we see there are some verses in Quran which talk about that following these commandments and working in economy like that, like doing the engaging in commerce and commercial dealings in that manner which is mentioned in Quran, gives us barakah. We get barakah in our money, in our dealings, in our contracts, in our agreements, in our business, in our spendings, in our charity, in our zakah, sadaqah, and if you are poor, you are into poverty and you exercise uh, restraint. You do not act on the incitements of shaitan to do illegal things to gain money or engage in riba based transactions to gain money, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you barakah in whatever you have, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you more afterwards. So this can also be seen in other verses of the Quran, inshallah. So again in chapter 4, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in verse number 29 that, "O you have believed, do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, but only in lawful business by mutual consent." Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting the concept of higher purpose in the economics, that do not consume one another's wealth. So we cannot be involved in such transactions which cause you know illegal consumption of another person's wealth. So it is not allowed. And then in Surah Yunus, in chapter 10 of Quran, in verse number 26, Allah is saying that for them who have done good is the best reward and extra. No darkness will cover their faces. Although this verse is not specifically about economics, the comprehensiveness of Quran is like that. Even the verses which are talking about commercial dealings and verses which are talking about money or spending, they can be understood in from different perspectives as well. uh, you know as per the circumstances. And then for similarly, this verse is a general verse, and this can be applied in other phenomena as well. But here, from economics perspective, um, we can see this verse in the manner that for those who will be engaging in transactions, in commercial transaction or economic transactions as per the rulings of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them, and He will reward them extra. Such as the concept of barakah. Just I discussed that concept, that Allah will put barakah in that things, on those transactions, in those dealings, agreements, contracts. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connecting the concept of non-materialistic thing with the materialistic thing and the higher purpose. So all these concepts of moral justice, transparency, refraining from gambling, riba, and refraining from discrimination in weights and measures, and eating up each other's property and wealth. All these concepts are mentioned in the verses, in several verses of Quran which are related to the economics, and all these are higher purposes. These are maqasid, behind the rulings mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, behind the economic and commercial rulings mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all these are higher purposes. So this was my presentation. uh, I hope I was able to explain it. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.